You're tuned into Ronversations, the podcast where real talk meets real change, straight from the heart of Santa Fe. I am your host, Ronald S. Trujillo, candidate for mayor in the 2025 Santa Fe election. Ronversation dives into issues that matter most to our community, from public safety to affordable housing, local jobs to transparent government, and everything in between. No scripts, no spin, just honest dialogue and bold ideas for a resilient Santa Fe. This is a space for open conversation, real solutions, and a shared vision for our city's future. Glad you're here. Let's talk. Buenos dias, Santa Fe, and welcome to Ronversations. Today, I'm honored to have two brothers that I've known for a very long time, Eric Johnson and Gary Johnson, two of Santa Fe's finest, who started their career at the Santa Fe Police Department and ended their careers at the police department. Eric, chief. Gary, detective. So, would you just tell me a little bit, tell our listeners a little about you? First, you, Eric.
Oh, I started my career with the Santa Fe Police Department in 1987. And like you said, it just worked a variety of different assignments during my time there, from patrolman to detective sergeant, and on up the ranks till I became the chief of police. And I spent my entire career there until I retired in 2009.
Gary?
Almost a similar story. I was in the military when Eric joined the police department.
Remember you were in the military.
So I left the army. Ended up joining the police department back in 1989. Spent a couple years on patrol. Was promoted to detective. Spent most of my career as a detective, working my way up through the ranks, detective sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and retired as a detective captain.
You guys had an astounding career, and during the time that you were chief is when I got on the council, because you were appointed by COS.
Right.
Yeah. So and Eric, one thing I want to say, we had a good relationship. I think you had your police force had a wonderful relationship with the mayor, the councilors. These are the things I want to ask you. Over your time on the police force, what did you see working really well? As chief, you, Gary, as detective. What were some of the things that you saw working really well that benefited, the police force, and also benefited the police, the safety of the citizens here in Santa Fe?
I think back during that time, I think the dynamics of the police department were a little bit different. There were a lot of older officers, a lot more experience than what we're seeing now. Right now, you see a lot of real young officers. And we just had a good department that ran pretty smooth. We had a good investigations bureau. We had a traffic unit, public relations, and just everything seemed to work pretty smooth. As you know, being on the city council, there was ups and downs.
Of course.
It doesn't matter what police department you're with. There's always manpower issues and stuff like that. We would have struggles with keeping vacancies.
And I think at the time too, we on the council we tried to do incentives as to
Right.
to bring more police officers. Either new ones or try to recruit them from other departments.
I think we were pretty successful. We brought our vacancy rate way down, but even though we would be staffed at 100% for short times, there's always officers that leave and look for other opportunities. But we just had a good working relationship within the whole department, and everybody worked together. And we were able to keep things running pretty smooth. And then, as you know, you've been on the public safety committee.
I chaired that for many years.
There was a lot of open communication on what the needs of the police department were and stuff like that. And we had our supporters. We had some of those that didn't support us as well. And I think one of the issues that we looked at back then was the growth of Santa Fe, right? So
Yes.
We did manpower studies, and we knew that the annexation would be coming up.
Exactly. That's what I was going to mention about the annexation.
That was a big thing back then. So we did manpower studies based on the calls for service at that time. And, back then, I think that we came up that we needed an additional 35 officers at that time, if you remember, right? But the funding is always an issue and stuff like that. So after I retired, of course, then the annexation happened, and the growth of Santa Fe is just tremendous right now.
And it continues to grow.
Right.
Yeah. And you, Garrett, what did you see? I mean, you as a detective, what was working? What do you think?
I also came up during a time when there was, community policing was big, right? In fact, I don't know if Santa Fe remembers, but we changed the color of our police cars, right, from blue to white.
I remember that.
To make those cars more approachable, right? And so the big emphasis was to make the officers, approachable, to make get out and do more foot patrols when possible, if you were on day shift, to get out and talk to our citizens and that type of stuff. And and today in today's environment, it's hard when you're running from call to call to call, right? And I think if you look at the crime stats now, crime is up about 5% in the city of Santa Fe, and so I think the community policing model that we worked under, that we helped implement back then, I think it worked. I think you know um, it's important, to have your officers approachable, right? And our officers, I think our officers in Santa Fe, I think they do a great job. Um, Chief Joy, Chief Valdez, right? They actually came up with us through the ranks when they were younger officers. So it's nice to see them promote through the ranks.
Most definitely.
Because it's important to keep that institutional knowledge, right? And but when you have constantly turnover and officers are going from one department to other departments, you lose that institutional knowledge. Now, as a detective, I had the benefit of working with a lot of the older detectives that had been in investigations for a long time. Marshall Lujan, Frank Rael, John Garcia, Dan Chappell, Bill Garcia, a lot of guys that have been around for a long, long time. And they passed down all that knowledge to me, right? So, when I rose up through the ranks in detectives, I kept a lot of that institutional knowledge of who did what, who operated how, right? And stuff like that. And I would share that with, or pass it down to the detectives that I worked with. And so when we're talking about the communication in the department, I think it was really good back then. One of the things and I just want to give a shout out to Chief Joy that he's done is when we talk about institutional knowledge, he's also tried to organize some lunches and stuff like that to bring back the older officers to at least come back together, right? And to have those conversations.
No, I think that's a great thing.
Right.
You're able to, younger officers are able to talk to you, and get the knowledge that you had attained over all these years. I think that's wonderful.
One of the things that's really concerning is, to me anyway, I live here in the South Side, and it's not so much that crime's rising; it's the type of crime that we see here on the South Side. We were taking a walk the other night, and typically in an area that you would never see this type of activity, right? People just open air shooting up, on the street and that type of stuff. And I think once you become, you see it so often, you become desensitized to it, right? And there was a time where we would just drive up to the Sonic, right, every night and go get a sundae or whatever. Now the Sonic's closed. Young man got shot there, and that was sad to see. But just that area right there, and I'll just say it, that whole stretch probably between St. Michael's Drive and Airport Road is now turning into, what Central Avenue in Albuquerque has turned into, right? A war zone, especially for a lot of business owners. We had a dollar store in a little shopping mall there.
Right by Big Five.
Yeah, right by Big Five. And they were shutting down. So I was there one day and how are you guys shutting down? Their window was broken out. They had they had to board it up, and they just said, we just can't survive in this location with the amount of crime that we're experiencing.
And I think that goes to pertain to what's happening at Peace Place. I know that has been an issue, and I know that a brand new organization is now coming in to run it for the next 4 years. I think that's what they signed the contract. But I think the ultimate issue is that Pete's Place will eventually move. That is, and with that moving to also, I guess they want to have a resource center as well right next to it. So, during this whole campaign, I've been talking about collaboration, how I need to collaborate with the county, with the state, with the schools, because the burden can't just all be on the city of Santa Fe. We've got to, reach out and say, okay, where is this new place going to, this new Pete's Place, whatever it's called, going to be? Is it going to be on the outskirts of the city, within the county? We don't know. But again, I think the ultimate goal is to ensure that it doesn't have an ill effect on neighborhoods nor businesses.
And the other struggle that goes along with the homelessness, we weren't dealing with it in such a big magnitude as we see right now, but back in those days with the homelessness, you also have the mental health crisis, right? So you have people that are out living on the streets that have mental illness issues, and really no way to deal with it. We used to pick them up and take them to the hospital. They would get them stabilized on their medications and stuff, but the minute they go back to the street, there was no way for them to continue getting their meds, or whether they couldn't get them or they chose not to take them anymore or whatever. So along with the homelessness, we've seen a lot of mental health issues right now. As a matter of fact, when we were talking about the South Side, Gary and I were standing out in front of my mom's house not too long ago, and a homeless guy came walking through there, and he was all drugged out. He was hallucinating, and so we stayed watching him for a while.
Yes, of course.
He finally left. But we're just seeing a lot more of that in the neighborhoods. You drive down the street in the neighborhoods, and there's homeless people walking around all over.
No, we see it here. I mean, like I said, as Gary just mentioned, the corridor between Airport Road and San Marcos Drive. This is where we live. We live in the Belma. I call it the Belma barrio. It's where we all grew up.
And then that creates, you have all the homeless issues, and the police get tied up on that stuff. The medical personnel get tied up because they're dealing with the intoxication on the street, the drug use, all that type of stuff. So all the city resources are getting tied up dealing with stuff that they shouldn't have to be.
Right, and that's all the way, from the fire department, the ambulances that are constantly rolling in there, right, trying to provide service, and then and along with all of this stuff, look, I mean, I know we definitely have to come up with a plan to assist those people that are unhoused, right? But there has to be a plan, right? We just can't just keep sending the police and that's the plan, right? I mean, a lot of those people would benefit from, they're making these portable houses now, these little portable, huts or
micro houses,
yeah, right. And but with that, you also have to bring in resources. You have to bring in mental health resources. You have to bring in like people that can help with the food insecurity, right? And medical resources as well. And all I can say is that I don't know what's happening at City Hall, but it doesn't appear that that's what's happening.
Well, right. We went to a lot of the meetings dealing with this, and going back to the micro houses, we were at a few meetings, and I ended up going up and speaking. I told everybody, well, you guys haven't addressed the elephant in the room, and it's called NIMBYism, and not in my backyard. And I said sometimes that NIMBYism needs to be listened to because it is affecting neighborhoods. And, these are where people have been living their entire lives. They don't want to see something homeless, pallet homes. They don't want to see it in their backyard. So that's the whole thing is that there has to be that open dialogue. And I've always said, what's good for the south side is also good for the east side. If we're going to put something in one place, we've also got to look at a place. We've got to look at all the districts to see where these places can be placed, because you can't put the burden solely on one district.
Right. And I think just by demographics alone, the east side, because of the way it's laid out, it's harder to I think it's harder for our unhoused to migrate into those neighborhoods. Although at one time, I don't know if everybody remembers, but there on Artist Road, there was a huge encampment right down below what was that? Not 500 East or
Right.
right. And I remember because we had a homicide down in there, and we went down there, huge encampment, and and eventually the area residents got that moved out, right? And but unfortunately, what happens, I think, if you let your unhoused problem go on and on and on, others from other communities end up migrating here, right? And I think a lot of the people that I see on the streets, the majority of them, I don't recognize them. I don't know them. I don't, and
But going on that thing, Chief, I think we had discussions because we had known that a lot of people that were coming up from Albuquerque via the rail runner. I mean, we knew that was happening, and I think your department even had conversation with Albuquerque's police department as well as to
Well, if you recall that one year we had that church in Albuquerque that put about 40 homeless people on the train and send them up here to Santa Fe because they said that they didn't have any room in their shelters there and stuff, and it was winter time, right? And our shelters were full too.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I mean, we had to put them back on the train and send them back.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunate,
Right? And back when we were there, Judge V. Hill had the mental health court.
Yes.
We have all the drug court programs going and stuff like that, and that helped tremendously with the amount of cases and stuff we were dealing with back then. But like we were just talking about, Santa Fe is growing so much right now. Like when we would deal with the homeless back in our day, there was a handful of them. We knew most of them by first name and stuff like that, and they were mostly local people from around here, and we knew who they were, right? And now you just drive up and down Cerritos Road. There's so many people, and you can just see the mental health issues that are going along with it, the way these people are acting, the drug issues that go along with it as well. And like I said before, it just ties up so many resources that we got to figure out a better way to deal with that.
Yeah.
And the police can't solve it by themselves.
Of course not. And that that's why I had you here. Like I said, I consider you guys experts. You guys, you worked it. This was your career. I want to talk to you now. As pertaining to we talked to Gary about how you wanted the police to be approachable. Well, I think back when I was a little boy growing up, you used to see police officers as our coaches, as our mentors. That's what I remember. I mean, I just as football coaches, baseball coaches, you name it. It was a police officer that was one of the coaches or umpiring around. I don't see that very often no more. And I coached many years at Double ABC.
It was easier back then because police officers could afford to live in Santa Fe, right?
Even to a certain extent.
Even in this neighborhood, right? There were several police officers that lived in this neighborhood, right? Pete Martinez was one who lived one of your neighbors right down the road, and in our neighborhood, right? I mean, you couldn't go 2 blocks and not come across a police car.
I grew up on Pajarito, and we had 3 police officers living there. I mean, we felt safe, and we know we were safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's tough for the officers to become involved in the community because the majority of them are living out of town in other communities.
Exactly.
And after working a 10, 12, 13, 14-hour shift, when are they going to find the time to do the extras?
Most definitely. It is hard, and that's the thing that that I definitely want to tackle. As mayors, affordable housing, and for the people who live here, but of course for our police officers, for our firefighters, for our teachers, we want to keep those people living here in Santa Fe.
Well, since I left the police department, I've worked for the Milwaukee Valley School District for about the past 15 years. And speaking about teacher housing, right? Like one of the things that we're looking at is creating a teacherage, right? Building a spot, where homes for teachers to live in because they can't find housing, right? So we can't hire teachers if they don't have any place to live, right? So that trickles down into the whole problem, not just with your police officers, and have to travel from Rio Rancho or the outskirts of Santa Fe. It's your teachers, it's your firefighters, and now
Your medical people,
and your workforce that, look at the lines of traffic heading out of town at the end of the day, and look at the line of traffic coming into Santa Fe every morning, right? And, you see apartment complexes going up all over the place, but even our own kids can't touch the rent. They can't touch the rent unless they move in with 2 or 3 or 4 other people to split the rent, right? And so we basically have priced out our youth, our up and comers, right? We priced out our officers. They can't afford to buy houses here, right? Our nurses, our firefighters, our teachers, right? So, we need to go back to this affordable housing initiative, right? And not just for those professionals. I mean, it needs to be across the board,
Exactly.
right? So our kids can move back here, right?
Well, one of the things, and I think you guys remember, we had purchased the Northwest Quadrant. That was the big thing. We purchased Northwest Quadrant. We could build affordable housing. It was on the east side of Santa Fe. And after I left the council, nothing happened. I started hearing that this current administration started selling off parcels of that property. I mean, that's not what it was about. This was about affordability. So when I get into the mayor's office, this is one of the things I definitely want to look at right away as to what parcels of land are still available, because whatever is available still, we need to move on it. We need to build affordable houses. Like you just said, Gary. Across the board for everybody to have that chance
To have that ability
to
do
stay
that.
here in Santa Fe.
Yeah, I mean, and there's going to come a point where we're going to reach a breaking point, to where the workforce isn't going to be able to afford to drive all the way here, right? Housing is a huge issue. It's a huge issue, and you know, I've got a daughter that lives in New York, one that lives in Tennessee, my son in Wisconsin, right? And we joke about, oh no, right? I can afford to come back to Santa Fe.
Yeah.
Right. So
when you look at the housing here, we laugh because my mom and dad, the house that they bought that house brand new back in their day for like $8,900, right? And those houses are going up for sale now in the neighborhood. And those houses are 60 years old and they're selling for $350,000, $400,000 now. And really, for a young person that's just starting off, $300,000 or $400,000 is not an affordable.
Of course not at all.
and if you can't afford to move into our neighborhoods, then you certainly can't send your kids to those schools, right? And so then your schools are going to start shrinking. They're going to start closing schools in those neighborhoods. We've seen some of that already.
And those are the issues that I think I've talked to some of the police officers as well, and people that my friends that have moved to Rio Rancho. They've said, "Well, I've moved to Rio Rancho. Of course, I get more house for what I pay for," and they look at the school system as well.
The other thing is Santa Fe is a big retirement community, so this conversation doesn't really affect those retirees that have moved here because their kids are gone. The kids are gone, right? But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, you want to have a sustainable community because, look, I mean, drive down our streets, right? You got weeds and Chinese elms and growing out of control, right? You've got graffiti that goes up and stays up, and then you pass by it a few days later, and there's more graffiti, and then that doesn't get taken down right away. And I was driving by the old Pet Boys here on my way here, and they're putting something in there now, but
AutoZone, I think, or something.
right.
Like that.
But it's all graffitied up,
yeah.
Right. And the only way to get that graffiti down, somebody had to buy the property. So I'm hoping that whoever bought the property, that they stay for a while, because just in that area, you've lost that dollar store, you've lost, Sonic, you lost the car wash that just was next to Denny's.
Yeah,
they just shut down
too.
Right.
Well, this is the thing that I've been talking about too. When I was on the council, I was able to find during this Obama, they had stimulus money. So I found stimulus money that went for doing medians, and so I was able to put that money along Rodeo Road and Zero Road. So that is what ultimate, what I want to see here in Santa Fe. When you come into Santa Fe, you see clean medians, you see landscape medians. You don't see potholes. You know, it kind of bugs me that the city, holds this pothole palooza. Now it's time for us to fill potholes this month. We should be filling potholes all year long. I mean, this is something, we've got to keep up with this, because that's the way that, you sustain a city, by, constantly ensuring weeds are pulled, weeds are taken care of, your streets are curbed. And you see something, when I was on council, I would be watching a game, a little league game at Bicentennial. Not in my district, but if I saw something, I would always, write it down. And then when I got home, I, send an email to the city manager, hey, there's an issue here. And I'd also CC the city councilor that, I CC them on this issue. And the next day, they went and fixed it. Even just a chunk of concrete out like that. To me, I don't see that happening.
Well, I remember when you were on the council, one of your biggest pet peeves was the parks, right?
And that's what I ran on, because with the parks fund.
And I'll tell you right now, our parks are in horrible shape. I took my granddaughter to the park the other day, and we had to leave because it was so dirty, and there was a syringe there up by one of the benches.
When we passed the parks fund, we allocated. I still remember we allocated something like $2.5 million to Franklin Miles, another $2 million plus to Rayville. I mean, those parks after that were pristine. They were pristine. We were able to build Martin Luther King Park, Las Estancias. So the money was well spent. But I felt after I got off the council, the parks went to crud.
They don't have any workers to keep them clean.
And it's not just the parks. I mean, you see a lot of our infrastructure in these older neighborhoods. The sidewalks are crumbling, right? You can drive down Serengo Road. There's a spot there that the Chinese elms have grown into the path of the sidewalk, or the sidewalks are raised and buckled, right? So if you're somebody who's in a wheelchair, right? Because I know a few years ago the cities, they did the curb cuts, right, to make them more accessible for people with disabilities. Yeah, that's great. But if the rest of the sidewalk is trashed and you can't get your wheelchair, and I have a cousin that is wheelchair bound, right? And a lot of the sidewalks in this area are in such poor condition, right, that it doesn't matter if you do the curb cuts, right? You can't go down the
well, that's what I say. This city has to be proactive instead of reactive, because this should be an ongoing thing.
Mm-hmm.
You see something happening, it kind of bugs me that you have to call the city constituent line to let them know there's a pothole, and we'll get back to you in 4 days. You should get back to the constituents within 24 hours. At least let them know, acknowledge you've heard what they have to say. It's being processed, sent to the right department. So to me, I don't see customer service as well. At the city.
And, ultimately, in the city of Santa Fe, we have tourism and we have state government, right? That's really what generates a lot of jobs, right? And tourism is really our lifeblood. And, so when you drive into Santa Fe, you should be like, wow, right?
We're the capital city.
Hey, no matter which direction you're coming from, you should be, wow, I'm in Santa Fe. I'm blown away. Unfortunately, the reaction is, wow, this is Santa Fe?
Right? Agreed.
Because you're running into like graffiti on bridges, and you're running into, trash on the streets, or the medians that are overgrown. And this has an effect on our downtown businesses, our business owners, right? We want to create a city that feels safe, looks safe, sounds safe, and so there's lots of issues going on here, but we just can't focus all in just one area.
Exactly. Well, I had Greg Holt, the mayor of Rio Rancho, on the other day, and that's what we had discussed about. I drove into Rio Rancho. I didn't see trash on the road. I saw beautiful landscaping, and when I asked him, what's the secret? It's just constant maintenance. That's what it is. Our workers are always there. They're always making sure they see something. They drive up. There's weeds. We pull them. Same thing can happen here. Santa Fe has a bigger budget than Rio Rancho. It can be done. I think and what I'm saying is, it all starts at the top. And to me, that's why I'm running for mayor, because there's a lack of leadership, right now with this administration.
Well, and for those that are in the trenches that are doing the work, your maintenance workers, your road crews, right? I mean, those are very important jobs. I mean, so what are their salaries in comparison?
Exactly.
Right? If you have lots of openings in those positions, is it because we're not paying a competitive salary? We can't fill those? Because there's that trickle down effect,
Exactly.
right? There's not enough people to go out and fix the potholes. There's not enough people to remove the graffiti. There's not enough people to take the weeds down, right? And
right now, all the weed cleanup around town, I see it seems like it's all private companies.
Yeah, and that's what I've seen. And I spoke with some of the city workers as well, and the sad part about it is when I spoke with them, a lot of them aren't happy. They're not happy working for the city of Santa Fe, and I'm like, what happened? I've been gone 8 years, yes, but just in those last 8 years, the city of Santa Fe has gone from a place where people loved to come to work. I remember they had some of the best benefits. They wanted to come to work. Now, Ron, I can't wait till I retire, till I get out of here. And I mean, that's the whole mentality I want to change. I want to change that whole culture. It's like, I want you, when you wake up in the morning, hey, I'm waking up, I'm going to work at the city of Santa Fe. I'm happy because, I'm respected and I want to do a good job for the city. That's the whole mentality that, like I said, the whole culture that I want to change. I want, employees to feel, hey, you are respected. Every time I go to council meetings, I used to always talk to the, to the, to everybody there. Just, hey, how's your day going? How's it going? The council's going good. I had those relationships with our workers, and I'm very proud that I was able to do that. They were very, like you said, approachable. They knew that Ron Trujillo was approachable. They could tell me stuff, and that's the whole thing I want to think. I think now a lot of employees, they live in fear of this administration as to, if I say something, what's the retaliation? And I think that's a thing that that's why they want to come to work. And again, these are the things I want to change.
And if you have employees that are not happy, then you start seeing the effects of that. People calling in sick, all those other issues.
Well, and then honestly, and I mean, I think we have to look at our directors. Are they doing what we're asking them to do? Because we're paying them good salaries, right? We're paying them good salaries, all the way from our city manager, right? I mean,
well, see, and that's the whole thing. When this administration came in, he had a chief of staff, city manager. Now I hear they want to have a deputy city manager. I mean, to me, this administration thinks they're the president, and that's not, you're the mayor of a small town. And I think to me, I believe, I've been saying it for all these years, the city of Santa Fe is too tough. We have to look at, how we, what jobs are needed, what jobs aren't. And if we can, let that money flow down so that we can hire the workers.
Right. Or increase their pay.
Increase their pay, yes.
Right. Take some of the higher paid positions. Like, do we really need a deputy city manager?
I don't.
Yeah, I mean, and take that money, that salary savings, and send it down to the people that are doing the work, and
on the basic city services.
Well, I think that's like I said. This is what we're running on. Basic city services. This is what I believe a mayor and a city council. That's your job, ensuring city runs and is functioning for everybody.
And it's just like any other city. You have to invest in your public safety. It's your fire department, your police department. Because they're the ones that are out there responding and dealing with all these problems. And even back when I was there, it got overwhelming at times.
Well, that's one of the things. I remember you would come, to the council, wanting certain things, and I remember we'd have debates, and I do remember some of the city councilors were like, well, they don't need this. The police are, you know what? And I used to tell them, are you the expert? This is our police officers. These are our firefighters. We need to give them. We need to support them. We need to give them, the resources. We need to give them the training. That's why I said when you guys came, I would listen. I say, okay, this is needed. You wouldn't be coming to us, if it wasn't needed. That's the thing that I try to, let my colleagues know. There's a reason but the police, the fire are coming to us because they need this. We as a city council, we need to support them because guess what? It's in the end, it's the safety of our community, and it's those gentlemen and ladies that are putting their lives on the line to protect us. We need to be more supportive of that.
Oh, we bring the data to back it up. Like right now, you have all kinds of resources. You send some of your top police people to staff and command and stuff like that. They know how to do manpower studies and stuff like that and present the information. And you can even send the information back to Northwestern University and they'll go over everything and they'll verify that it's accurate, right? To show that the information that you're providing is what's needed. But they can only do so much. They can provide the information, but they don't get the resources to address the issues. It's really a moot point.
Well, real quickly, what do you think? You're a resident here in Santa Fe. You see what's going on. What do you think needs to change here in the city of Santa Fe as it pertains to public safety?
Well, you think first and foremost, you need to start focusing more on the homeless problem. I personally don't think bringing a private company in to run the Pete's place is going to solve the issue. A lot of those people don't even go and stay at the shelter.
Running it from California.
Yeah, this one is based out of San Francisco.
Yeah. And I've talked to a lot of the newer police officers myself, and I was talking to one young man the other day, and he's only been here about a year, and he's ready to leave. He says that he's getting held over for shifts, almost daily. They don't want to work the overtime. The money's not that important to them. They want to be able to come to work and do their job and feel like they're making a difference, right? But it's still the same. They're still running from call to call to call to call. And there's no downtime. There's no time to do community policing.
Right. And
or
just
coaching and all that stuff like that.
And just to go off of what Eric said, right? When you're still handling 5,600 to 5,900 calls for service a month, right? That's why, a lot of us don't see police officers in the neighborhoods because that's a very high call volume for the number of officers we have that's split over 3 different shifts, right? That cover, a week-long process. So you got 2 different shifts, right? Well, you got 3 shifts. You got your day shift, your swing shift, your graveyard shift, right? And then, they work a number of days and then there's a common day and then the next group comes in. So it's really not a lot of officers for the amount of calls of service. So we have to look at the calls of service and come up with a plan to try to reduce the calls of service. So then those officers have time to start going back into the neighborhoods and doing more patrolling and proactive stuff. Now, you're reactive. You're reacting to everything that's coming in. You're just reactive. You're not proactive, right? And I think our police department is doing a great job based off the resources that they have. I know the recruiting unit, right? They're hustling, and that's what needs to happen. But you also have to retain those officers.
Yes.
Right? And you have to, force overtime or whatever, the overtime issue. And I'll just say it, man, the divorce rates in law enforcement are very, very high, right? Those officers are away from their families a lot. And it does take its toll, like mentally, physically, even now that we've retired, we get certain notifications almost daily now of officers that we worked with that are now passing away. And they're passing away young, right? They're dying at a much younger age than they should have.
Not only that, these guys, they get held over their shift. They're working 10, 12, 13 hours, but they're still driving to work 2 extra hours a day, depending on where they live.
Exactly.
So their days are turning into 15-hour days. And when you go home and sleep for a few hours, you got to turn around and come right back.
Or you have a day off, but now you're subpoenaed into court. So you got to come on your day off to go to court, right? And if you miss a court date, what happens? Right? You could be written up, So
there's a lot.
And then the public gets frustrated because they have to call the police for something, and they're waiting and they're waiting and they're waiting. The response time might be 2 hours or whatever, but a lot of people don't understand that calls for service are prioritized, right? You might be that next person that's on the list and the officer's on his way to your house, but then a priority call comes in and he gets put off and gets sent somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, and I'll give you the example. We were at one of the coffee shops too, and sure enough, we saw somebody. They were snorting whatever it was, and the people came out of the coffee shop. Are they doing what we're thinking? Yeah, we think they're. They called the police, and we were there for over an hour, and they were kind of bugged because nobody showed up, and I said, the police, they're stretched so thinly, they're probably at other things as well. It is unfortunate, and I do see the frustration in business owners and people, when they expect the police to be there like that, and that's not the case. There are other calls and other priorities that take it.
And I don't have any stats, but I just know from what I see on social media and reading the paper or whatever, it seems like there's more incidents of violent crime. You're seeing more shootings here.
And that's what you say. You've seen homicides here in the city that we didn't usually see. I mean, if Santa Fe got 1 or 2 murders a year, that's a lot.
Right? True story, right? So I live a few blocks from here. Right?
Yes.
And, so one of my jobs at the school district is I get up in the middle, especially if it snows. I get up in the middle of the night and I go drive to Milwaukee and I check the roads and I make the call on whether we have a 2-hour delay or we cancel school. So we had a big snowstorm, got up in the middle of the night, went out to my vehicle. My vehicle was broken into, right? My other vehicle was broken into. I had 3 vehicles that were broken into and it had snowed. Footprints in the snow. I followed the footprints to a house, right, a few blocks away, and and they got stuff out of our vehicle. Called the police. I had to leave. I had to go check the roads. I called the police, and I waited as long as I could. And I told them, hey, look, they were busy.
Yes.
I mean, this wasn't a property crime that night. Wasn't high priority because they were dealing with other more serious issues, right? But as a citizen, I mean, and look. I'm a retired detective captain who oversaw right? I was frustrated, right? But I understood.
Yes.
Right? I understood why they didn't show up. But I mean, it didn't alleviate my frustration, right? I wanted to go knock on the door myself and go get my property back, right? But had I done that, yeah, how would it have turned out?
Of course.
It could have gone south, and now, but I didn't. And, and that's just an example of like I know our officers at times get overwhelmed, get too busy, and so I go back to we have to figure a way to reduce those calls of service, right? And a lot of those calls they're dealing with the unhoused, they're dealing with mental health issues, they're getting stuck in the emergency rooms because whatever reason, right? But we have to bring in other resources. The police can't solve everything. Right? They can't be the mental health people. They can't be, help. And I know a lot of these officers will pull money out of their own pockets, right, to help with food insecurity if somebody's really in need, that type of stuff, But I mean, we have to bring in other resources to help this problem, right? Because we got to flip this whole Sirius Road corridor turning into Central Avenue, right? Because the graffiti's bad, right? There's no restrooms for any of these people to, right? So they're going on side streets, right? I mean, look, it's a basic human function, right? You know what I mean? But what are we doing to try to help? It doesn't seem like we're doing a whole lot, right?
It's got to be frustrating for the business owners. The other day I went to Walmart. I needed 3 things, right? They're in 3 separate areas of the store. Everything's locked up, so I had to pay at 3 different places because they wouldn't put it in a lockbox or anything and send it up front. Whatever, right? So,
no, it is. I mean, you just go in here to Walgreens. Just here, everything's locked up. You have to call somebody to get it. That's not the way it used to be. You used to go there. You need shaving cream. You got shaving cream. Now you got to call somebody. You need to unlock it. So yeah,
I'm in the process now of buying my youngest a car, helping her buy a car, and there's a couple dealerships I won't go to just because I don't want to. I don't want to engage with. I don't want to be confronted with with anything. which sucks for those dealerships,
Yes.
right? Because, potential buyer, I'm a potential buyer, I just don't want to go deal with it, right?
Well, that's just it. It's affecting our local businesses, our small businesses.
Let me tell you, I worked in the retail before I became a police officer, right? So after I got out of police work for a while, I went and worked as one of the managers at Walgreens right there on Ceres Road, right? And let me tell you, that store was so bad, it was more dangerous to work at Walgreens than being a police officer on the street. And I'm not kidding.
Yeah, no.
Now, one night I was closing up, getting off at 11 o'clock, and while I was outside cleaning the snow off my car, a guy walked in and robbed the cashier at gunpoint. Right there while I was standing there in the parking lot, And, I mean, so these business owners, they're losing so much money with stuff that's walking out the doors. That's why everything's locked up, and it becomes frustrating for the consumer.
Exactly. But it's understandable.
Yeah, but that's just the way it is right now. And it's sad because Santa Fe was never like this.
Before we end, one of the things that I always remember too with the police officers was we had police living in parks. We used to have police living at schools, and you don't see that no more. That's something that I thought was great. Because we went to Kearney, and I remember there used to be a police officer living at Kearney. There used to be a police officer living at I can't think of the park that's right there in the middle of town, Asheville. Yes. And you don't see that no more. I wish that would return.
When I was a young officer, I lived at the young school, right? And that's not free living. There's a work that comes along with
Of
it.
course.
As a police officer that lives there, you're expected to take care of issues that come up on the school grounds, right? And it was a great program. And it cut down on the vandalism to the school, and other issues would come up that you would be able to help the staff with or whatever without them having to call the police department and tie up for their resources. That program went away years ago.
Yeah, that's something that I definitely would like to revise. I'd like to.
That was kind of a part of community policing, right?
Yeah, and the nice thing about it too is it gave these officers also a place to live. I remember one of the things we were trying to do at the time too was if we could find a place for the police officer to live with lower rent, and then we were also looking at buying some of these houses within some of these within like even here at the Belmont, if the city could buy that house. And then we can look on and say, hey, either one of our public safety officers, police, fire, we can get you into this home. So I think there's just a lot of dialogue has to be spoken. You got to bring, like I said, collaboration, bring everybody to the table so we have these conversations. So so we can start, making sure that our police officers, our fire teachers, our children are able to stay in the city that they grew up in.
Yeah, and I have a friend that owns a business downtown Santa Fe, and he's all about promoting local culture, right? And I feel that I think he's doing a great service to the city by promoting local culture and that type of stuff. But I in a lot of ways I feel sorry for him as well because for a local small business owner, right, trying to make it in downtown Santa Fe, right, and deal with crime issues also, deal with rent issues. There's got to be a top to bottom, like comprehensive look at how do we support local business owners? How do we bring back teachers, make it affordable for them to live and teach here, right? I know several teachers now in Powhatan. They have an apartment in Santa Fe, and there's like 4 teachers that live in the apartment, right? Because they have to split the cost. That's the only way that they can survive, right? And 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 I honestly believe like our police need to be part of the school system. They need to be those role models. They need to be in the schools, right? And we can't control what the Santa Fe Public Schools does, but just on a school safety level, it's huge. And I know that I'm a security director for my school district, and I welcome the police. I welcome the fire department. I welcome them, right? Oh, hey, just come by, take a cruise to the school. I'll buy you lunch, right? I want them part of our community.
Well, I think those are the relationships, as mayor, that I have, that we need to have with the superintendent to do that. Because, like you said, it's important that the police are there, So, right. So,
the police, they have to train with the local school districts, because the incidents of school violence is still happening everywhere. The police have to train constantly to be prepared for that. And they got to have that good relationship with the schools, right? I mean, when I worked for the Milwaukee Police Department, we used to go out and train with them. They would let us train at the school, so that way the officers were familiar with the
surroundings,
with the layout of the schools and stuff like that. And it's tough to accomplish sometimes, but it's something that you have to do. Right?
But we want our officers to have the time to be able to make those relationships with the schools, right? And,
well, you know what? This has been a great conversation. I want to thank both of you for taking the time out of your schedule to be here. Like I said, this is why I want to talk to people like you. You've been there. You've lived it. So you know what's happening. You know what works, what doesn't work, and like I said, and when I am mayor, I'm going to be asking you guys questions because I trust you. You're dear friends, and I value what you guys have to say.
Well, we've been out for quite a while,
but like Gary said, your knowledge is still there,
and the basic concept and issues are still the same. You got to deal with the social problems. You got to support public safety. And,
we have to support
local business owners, all that stuff. It's the same issues, just in different volumes now.
And I think, honestly, even our unhoused population, we have to bring in resources to assist them. Right? I tell some of our students at school, it's work being unhoused. It's, think about it. Standing on a corner for 8-12 hours a day in the elements, holding a sign, hoping somebody's going to give you money, right? If you don't think that's work, right, you're mistaken. That's hard work, right? And I challenge anybody to go and do it for a day. You go stand on a corner and hold a sign and beg for a day, right? That's a tough living. And I think, like, as leaders, we owe it to whoever comes into our boundaries in the city of Santa Fe, right? We owe it that, hey, you're coming into a safe city. We're going to provide safety to anybody. I don't care. Honestly, I don't care about immigration status. I don't care about anything. If you cross into our boundaries, right, it should be a safe place for you to be while you're here. And that needs to be the message, right? That the police department, you know what? We are the guardians of the city. We're the guardians, right? And you shouldn't fear us, of course, right? We're your partners, right? We want to be there to help find resources, help support, and I think that's what we really need to impress upon the community.
Well, I believe, I tell a lot of people, go talk to your police officers. You see a police officer standing there, just introduce yourself. Hi, how are you? Talk to them, thank them too, because like I said, your job is not an easy job. And so again, thank you guys, both of you, for being here. Gary, Eric,
thank you.
Always good. Santa Fe, adios, till we meet again.